As you'll see from the video, what she did was you first have to establish the officer's qualifications for administering the test with regards to the HGN. Certainly under People v. McCowan, the HGN will not even be allowed to be admitted. There won't be any testimony regarding it or regarding the defendant's performance on that test unless he's able to establish that he has the training and experience to administer the test. So this is critical to go over again with your officer ahead of time. You're going to want to have your officer explain to the jury what nystagmus is. I like the example of nystagmus looking like a marble going across sandpaper. When you have no alcohol consumption, the eye as it moves will look like a marble rolling across glass. The more alcohol the defendant or the suspect consumes, then the marble will appear to look like it's on rough sandpaper. There's actually a jerking. Some people are more comfortable explaining it as a ticking of a clock. One of the other things that you'll want to establish with your officer is that he or she asked the defendant whether or not he had contacts or glasses on. Now, a lot of times defense attorneys get all excited about this because they think that that means that the person can't do the test. That has no bearing on it at all. The only reason you're asking that question for your officer is to show that the defendant could see the stimulus that you were holding up in front of them. And one of the things you'll want to establish is that if they had glasses on or contacts, if the officer asked them whether or not they needed to remove them to be able to see the stimulus. The officer then will also make a few medical assessments. He does this by establishing whether or not they have equal pupil size, whether or not there's resting nystagmus. The reason why it's important for an officer to establish if they have resting nystagmus is that because it may be indicative of some medical problem going on, especially if you had a suspect who's been in a car accident. If they have nystagmus, they're very likely to have sustained a head injury. So you're going to want to make sure that you cover this with your officer ahead of time and that he understands this prior to getting on the witness stand. So they're going to be looking for resting nystagmus, and they're going to check to see if the eyes track equally. A little bit more about HGN. There are 6 clues that an officer looks for when administering the HGN. You heard Ms. Earlywine on the tape discuss this with Detective Malinowski. Those clues are lack of smooth pursuit, distinct and sustained nystagmus at maximum deviation, onset of nystagmus prior to 90 degrees, and then so that you have your 3 clues, but they have to check for each eye. So if the officer observes each of these clues in each of the eyes, there are your 6 clues. And it's going to be important that the officer, if he did the test correctly, checked each eye and then did a confirmation test. Also, and probably most importantly, one of the questions you're going to want to ask your officer at the close of each of these field sobriety tests is this: "And officer, did you conduct this test just as you were instructed at the academy per the NHTSA standards?" I think that is a critical question because it's showing that the officer did exactly what he or she was trained to do. Vertical nystagmus. Now that's something we don't hear very often about. I think a lot of officers tend to overlook that. Vertical nystagmus. That's something that often we don't hear about. Officers often overlook it. However, it is in the NHTSA standard and it is something that is supposed to be covered. Detective Malinowski did do vertical nystagmus with Mr. Mason. You will see him on the video actually lift his finger up and down and check for the nystagmus. The importance of vertical nystagmus is that if it's present, it indicates a very high level of alcohol in the defendant.